Parking attendant pays expired meter. For struggling mom, never knowing her boss was watching, the universe works in mysterious ways, setting wheels in motion through the smallest acts of kindness. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, the universe had plans for three strangers whose lives would intertwine in ways none of them could have imagined. The crisp autumn air bit at Marcus Johnson's exposed skin as he made his rounds through the downtown parking district. His city-issued jacket, navy blue with reflective strips that had lost their shine years ago, was too thin for the season's first real cold snap. His breath formed small clouds in front of his face as he checked meter after meter, his fingers growing numb despite the fingerless gloves he wore. At 43, Marcus had been a parking enforcement officer for nearly 7 years. Not his dream job, not anyone's dream job, but it paid the bills, mostly. The divorce 3 years ago had left him with child support payments that ate half his paycheck, an apartment with walls thin enough to hear his neighbors' arguments, and a general sense that life had somehow slipped through his fingers while he wasn't looking. "Morning, Marcus," called Mr. Abernathy, the elderly owner of the corner bookstore, who always arrived precisely at 7:45 a.m. to open his shop. Marcus nodded, raising his hand in a familiar wave. "Cold one today, Mr. A. double quote. Winter's coming early this year. You take care out there." These small exchanges were the highlight of Marcus's workday. The rest consisted of chalking tires, checking meters, and placing tickets under windshield wipers. A job that earned him more scowls than smiles, more curses than thanks. Sometimes he'd return to find his enforcement vehicle vandalized with crude words or symbols. Once someone had left a note that simply read, "Does it feel good ruining someone's day?" It didn't. It never did. Marcus rounded the corner onto Maple Street where the meters had 30-minute limits, the most lucrative block in his assigned zone. His supervisor, Richard Calloway, had recently emphasized the importance of revenue generation, which was corporate speak for write more tickets. Marcus understood the reality of municipal budgets, but he took no pleasure in adding to someone's financial burden. A $20 parking ticket might be nothing to some, but he knew what it felt like when $20 meant choosing between gas for the car or dinner for the kids. He was halfway down the block when he noticed the faded blue Honda Civic with the expired meter. The vehicle had seen better days. Dents along the passenger side, a rear bumper held on partly by duct tape, and a child's car seat visible through the back window. As he approached, he could see small toys scattered across the back seat and what looked like resumes on the front passenger seat. The meter had been expired for 17 minutes. Marcus glanced around. No sign of the driver returning. Protocol was clear: write the ticket and move on. Yet something made him hesitate. The car told a story he recognized all too well. He'd driven something similar after the divorce, when every penny went toward keeping a roof over his children's heads during his custody weekends. He reached for his ticket book, then stopped. Through the windshield, he noticed a sticky note on the dashboard. "Interview at 9:15, smile." The handwriting was rushed, hopeful. Marcus checked his watch. 9:27 a.m. He shouldn't care. It wasn't his business. People with problems got tickets every day. But standing there in the cold, something inside him, something he thought had hardened over years of disappointment, softened slightly. With a quick glance over his shoulder, Marcus pulled 4 quarters from his pocket and fed them into the meter. The digital display jumped to 20 minutes. He knew he could get written up for this. There were explicit regulations against officers paying meters. But in that moment, he couldn't bring himself to care. "Just this once," he muttered to himself, continuing his route down the street, unaware of the eyes watching from the 3rd-floor window of the municipal building across the street. Elaine Foster's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd tried everything: deep breaths, positive visualization, even the quick meditation exercise the therapist had taught her last month. Nothing worked. The interview had gone horribly wrong from the start. She'd arrived late, flustered and apologetic, only to find her blouse had a small stain where 3-year-old Zoe had pressed her jelly-covered hands that morning in a goodbye hug. The interviewer, a slim woman with immaculate hair and a perpetual frown, had noticed immediately, her eyes flicking to the spot before returning to Elaine's face with barely concealed judgment. "So Mrs. Foster, Miss..." Elaine had corrected automatically, then wished she hadn't when the woman's eyebrow arched slightly. "Ms. Foster, you're applying for our administrative assistant position. I see there's a 5-year gap in your employment history," and it had gone downhill from there. Explaining that she left her previous job to care for her daughter after her husband had abandoned them both seemed too personal, too much like making excuses. But without the explanation, the gap looked suspicious, like she was hiding something. By the time the interview concluded with the perfunctory, "We'll be in touch," Elaine knew she wouldn't be hearing from them again. Now walking briskly back toward her car, she blinked back hot tears that threatened to spill over. This had been her third interview this month, and she was running out of options. The child support checks from her ex-husband had stopped coming 3 months ago when he moved out of state with his new girlfriend. Her savings were nearly depleted, and next month's rent loomed like a shadow over everything else. As she approached her car, Elaine mentally calculated how many days she could stretch her remaining funds. The medication Zoe needed for her asthma would eat up most of what was left. Maybe she could ask her landlord for another extension. Maybe the food bank would have enough this week. Maybe. Her life had become an endless series of maybes and what-ifs. So absorbed in her thoughts, she almost missed it. The meter beside her car showed 20 minutes remaining, glowing green instead of the angry red she'd expected. Elaine stopped short, confusion momentarily replacing her despair. She was certain she'd only put enough coins in for an hour. The interview had run long. The meter should have expired. She looked around, puzzled, then caught sight of a parking attendant half a block away, methodically checking meters. The same one she'd seen approaching as she'd rushed into her interview, already 7 minutes late. Had he? The thought that a stranger, especially one whose job it was to issue tickets, might have shown her kindness when she needed it most, made something twist painfully in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had done something for her, without expecting anything in return. Elaine slid into her car, the tears she'd been holding back finally spilling over. She rested her forehead against the steering wheel and allowed herself 30 seconds to feel it all. The disappointment, the fear, the unexpected gratitude for a small kindness from a stranger. Then she straightened up, wiped her face, and started the car. Zoe would be waiting at the daycare, and Elaine refused to be late picking up her daughter, no matter what else was falling apart in her life. She didn't notice the man watching from the municipal building as she pulled away, nor could she have guessed how their lives were about to change. Richard Calloway stood at his office window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the scene unfold on the street below. He'd been on the phone with the mayor's office when movement had caught his eye. One of his parking enforcement officers stopping at a meter, hesitating, then feeding it rather than writing a ticket. Most supervisors would have immediately documented the violation. There were clear policies against officers interfering with potential violations. Budget shortfalls meant every dollar counted, and parking enforcement was expected to generate its share of revenue. But Richard wasn't most supervisors. At 58, with 32 years in municipal service, he'd risen through the ranks from parking enforcement to department director. He'd seen how the job could harden people, turn them cynical. He'd fought against that tendency in himself for decades, not always successfully. He recognized the officer, Marcus Johnson. Quiet, reliable, never late, but never stayed a minute past his shift either. His performance evaluations were consistently adequate, but unremarkable. The kind of employee who blended into the background, neither a problem nor a standout. Until now, Richard watched as the woman returned to her car, noticed the meter, and looked around in confusion. He saw the moment of realization cross her face, followed by something that looked remarkably like the weight of the world temporarily lifting from her shoulders. He thought about the memo sitting on his desk, budget cuts, potential layoffs. He was supposed to select 2 names from his department by the end of the week. Marcus Johnson's name had been on his shortlist. Dependable but uninspired employees were often the first to go when numbers needed trimming. Richard stepped away from the window, returning to his desk where personnel files were spread out. He pulled Marcus's folder from the stack, opening it to review the sparse details of the man's 7 years with the department. Something about what he'd just witnessed nagged at him. In a world increasingly focused on metrics and bottom lines, he'd just seen a small act of human compassion that defied policy but honored something more important. It reminded him of why he'd gotten into public service in the first place. Not to enforce rules blindly, but to serve the community with heart and discretion. With a thoughtful expression, Richard closed the file and set it aside, separate from the others. He wasn't sure yet what he was going to do, but he knew he needed to learn more about both Marcus Johnson and the woman in the blue Honda. The Happy Hippo Daycare Center smelled of finger paint, disinfectant, and the unmistakable aroma of the mac and cheese lunch that had been served hours earlier. Elaine arrived 5 minutes before closing time, her shoulders tense with the familiar worry of being the last parent to pick up. "Mommy!" Zoe's excited voice rang out as she spotted Elaine at the door. The little girl abandoned the picture book she'd been looking at and ran toward her mother, dark curls bouncing, arms outstretched. Elaine knelt, gathering her daughter into a tight hug, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair. No matter how bad the day had been, this moment, this perfect, pure connection, made everything else recede temporarily. "I made you something," Zoe said, pulling back to reach into her small cubby. She withdrew a painting, still slightly damp, of what appeared to be two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "It's us, and we're going to the park with the big slide." Elaine's heart clenched. They hadn't been to the park in weeks, not since she'd started cutting back on gas usage to save money. "It's beautiful, sweetie. We'll hang it on the fridge as soon as we get home." Ms. Patel, the daycare director, approached with Zoe's backpack. "She had a good day today," she said with a warm smile that didn't quite mask the concern in her eyes. Though she mentioned she was hungry during afternoon snack, said she didn't have much breakfast. Heat rose to Elaine's cheeks. She'd been so rushed this morning, so anxious about the interview, that she'd only managed to give Zoe a single piece of toast before they'd rushed out the door. "We were running late this morning," she said lamely. Ms. Patel nodded, then hesitated before saying gently, "Elaine, I wanted to mention, we have a scholarship program for families going through temporary hardship. It would cover Zoe's care for up to 3 months while you get back on your feet." Pride warred with practicality in Elaine's chest. The daycare fees were her second largest expense after rent. 3 months of covered childcare would make an enormous difference. But accepting help meant admitting how dire things had become. I don't know," she stammered. "Just think about it," Ms. Patel said, pressing a form into Elaine's hand. "The application is simple, and it's completely confidential." On the drive home, Zoe chatted happily in her car seat about her day. The story they'd read at circle time, the tower she'd built with blocks, the friend who had shared her cookies at snack time. Elaine made the appropriate noises of interest while her mind raced, calculating and recalculating how to make it through the next few weeks. Their apartment was on the second floor of a converted house in what had once been a nice neighborhood, before the factory closures had hollowed out the town's economy. The stairs creaked as they climbed, and the hallway light flickered ominously. Another maintenance request the landlord had ignored. Inside, the apartment was clean but sparse. Elaine had sold most of their non-essential belongings months ago. What remained was functional rather than decorative, except for the photographs of Zoe that Elaine displayed proudly on every available surface. Those she would never part with. "Sandwich for dinner?" Elaine asked, opening the refrigerator to survey its meager contents. "With the crust cut off?" Zoe asked hopefully. "Absolutely. Crusts are for grown-ups anyway." Elaine managed a smile, though her stomach nodded at the thought of another meal of bread and the last scraps of lunch meat. She'd skip dinner herself tonight, saving the food for Zoe and tomorrow's lunches. As she prepared their simple meal, Elaine's mind kept returning to the parking meter. Such a small thing, really. 4 quarters, $1 in total. But someone had seen her struggle, however briefly, and had chosen kindness over punishment. In a world that lately seemed determined to grind her down, that tiny gesture felt monumental. She wondered about the parking attendant. What had made him decide to help rather than issue a ticket? Did he make a habit of such kindness? Or had something about her particular situation moved him? She wished she could thank him, explain how much that dollar had meant on this particular day. After dinner, bath time, and 2 bedtime stories, Elaine kissed Zoe goodnight and retreated to the living room. She spread her bills across the coffee table, the familiar ritual of deciding what could be paid and what would have to wait. The electricity bill was already past due, with a disconnection notice threatening action in 5 days. The rent was due in 2 weeks. Zoe's asthma prescription needed refilling by the weekend. Elaine buried her face in her hands, allowing herself a moment of despair before straightening up and reaching for her laptop. There had to be more job openings she hadn't yet found, more applications she could submit, more possibilities she hadn't explored. As she opened her email, a new message appeared at the top of her inbox. The sender was R. Callaway Municipal Services Department. Elaine frowned, puzzled. She hadn't applied for any municipal jobs recently. Curious, she opened the email. "Dear Ms. Foster," it began. "I'm writing to inform you of an immediate opening in our Administrative Services Division. Your resume was brought to my attention, and I believe your qualifications may be a good match for our needs. If you're interested, I'd like to schedule an interview at your earliest convenience. The position offers competitive benefits and a family-friendly schedule. Please call my office at your earliest convenience." Elaine read the email 3 times, confusion growing with each reading. She hadn't submitted her resume to the Municipal Services Department. How had this R Calloway person even gotten her name? And why the urgency? It could be a scam, she thought. But the email address ended in the city's official domain, and the phone number matched the municipal services department when she checked online. Hesitantly, hope flickering like a fragile flame, Elaine marked the email as important and decided she would call first thing in the morning. She couldn't afford to ignore any potential opportunity, no matter how mysteriously it had appeared. Marcus's tiny apartment was quiet, save for the persistent drip from the bathroom faucet that the landlord had promised to fix 3 months ago. He sat at his kitchen table, a plate of reheated pasta in front of him, scrolling through photos on his phone. His daughter smiled back at him from the screen. Emma, 13, with braces and a soccer uniform. Lily, 10, hugging their dog, Max. The pictures were from his last weekend with them, 2 weeks ago. His ex-wife had moved them 30 miles away after the divorce, making his twice-monthly visits logistically challenging and financially straining. He missed them every day. The way Emma rolled her eyes when he made dad jokes. The way Lily still held his hand crossing the street, though she insisted she was practically a teenager. The noise and chaos and life they brought to his otherwise solitary existence. The next photo made him pause. Both girls asleep on his couch, a movie still playing on the TV. He remembered taking it, thinking how peaceful they looked, how perfect despite everything that had gone wrong between him and their mother. His phone buzzed with a text message, interrupting his reverie. Need to reschedule this weekend, his ex-wife had written. Girls have a dance recital Saturday. Can you take them next weekend instead? Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest. Next weekend, he was scheduled for overtime shifts. Hours he badly needed to make the month's child support payment. But missing a weekend with his daughters wasn't an option. No problem, he typed back. Tell them I'm looking forward to it. He'd figure something out. Maybe Richard would let him switch shifts with someone else. Maybe he could pick up extra hours the following week to make up the difference. Maybe. Marcus set his phone down and rubbed his eyes. He was tired. Bone tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. 7 years of just getting by, of watching his dreams recede in the rearview mirror while he wrote parking tickets and tried to be a father during stolen weekends. He thought about the woman from this morning, the one with the blue Honda and the sticky note about an interview. He wondered how it had gone for her, whether she'd gotten the job. Something about her situation had resonated with him, reminding him of his own struggles after the divorce, when everything had seemed impossibly difficult. He'd broken protocol by feeding her meter. If Richard found out, there would be consequences. A written warning at minimum, possibly a suspension without pay if his supervisor was having a particularly bad day. Marcus knew he should regret taking the risk, but he didn't. Some rules deserve to be broken, especially when following them meant adding to someone else's burden. With a sigh, Marcus cleared his half-eaten dinner and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would be another day of checking meters and issuing tickets. Another day of trying to stay afloat in a life that sometimes felt like it was designed to pull him under. As he drifted off to sleep, his thoughts returned again to the blue Honda and its driver. He hoped in some small way that his tiny act of mercy had made her day a little easier. It wasn't much, but sometimes the smallest kindnesses were all anyone had to offer. The Municipal Services Building was an imposing structure of glass and concrete, 7 stories tall and spanning half a city block. Elaine stood on the sidewalk outside, Zoe's hand clutched tightly in hers, gathering her courage. She'd called the number in the email first thing that morning, and to her surprise had been offered an interview that very afternoon. The position needs to be filled immediately, the receptionist had explained. Mr. Calloway specifically requested we expedite your application. When Elaine had explained her childcare situation, Ms. Patel couldn't take Zoe on such short notice. The receptionist had been surprisingly accommodating. Bring her along. We have a children's corner in the waiting area with books and toys. Many of our employees are parents. We understand these challenges. Now, standing before the building in her one good interview outfit, a navy skirt suit she'd bought secondhand last year, Elaine felt a flutter of both hope and anxiety. This was unexpected, possibly too good to be true, but she couldn't afford to let the opportunity pass. Is this where you might work, Mommy? Zoe asked, looking up at the tall building with wide eyes. Maybe, sweetheart. We'll have to see. Elaine smoothed her daughter's curls. Remember what we talked about? You'll need to be very quiet and good while Mommy talks to some people. Can you do that? Zoe nodded solemnly. I brought Bunny to keep me company, she said, holding up her well-loved stuffed rabbit. And I can draw pictures for you. That's perfect. Elaine took a deep breath and led her daughter through the revolving doors into the building's marble-floored lobby. The receptionist directed them to the third floor, where indeed there was a small corner set up with a child-sized table, chairs, and a bookshelf. Zoe immediately gravitated toward the books while Elaine checked in with the department secretary. "Mr. Calloway will be with you shortly," the secretary said with a warm smile. "Can I get you anything while you wait? Water? Coffee? Water would be wonderful, thank you." Elaine replied, surprised by the courtesy. Her previous interviews had been much less welcoming. She was reviewing the department information packet she'd been given when a tall man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes approached. "Ms. Foster, I'm Richard Calloway, Director of Municipal Services." He extended his handshake firm but not overpowering. "Thank you for coming in on such short notice." "Thank you for the opportunity," Elaine replied, rising from her seat. "I confess I was surprised to receive your email. I don't recall applying for a position with the Municipal Services Department." Richard's smile was enigmatic. "Let's just say your qualifications came to my attention through an unusual channel. If you don't mind, I'd like to conduct the interview in my office." He glanced at Zoe, who was absorbed in a picture book. "Your daughter is welcome to join us, or she can stay here if she's comfortable. Either way is fine." Elaine hesitated. "Zoe, sweetie, do you want to come with mommy or stay here with your books?" Zoe looked up. "Can I stay here and draw?" The nice lady gave me paper and crayons. The secretary nodded reassuringly. "I'll keep an eye on her, Miss Foster. My desk is right here." "All right then. I won't be long, Zoe. Be good." Richard led Elaine down a hallway to a corner office with large windows overlooking the downtown area. As he gestured for her to take a seat, Elaine noticed something odd. From this vantage point, she could see the very parking spot where she'd parked yesterday for her disastrous interview. "Beautiful view," she commented, settling into the chair across from his desk. "It is. Gives me perspective on the city we serve." Richard sat down, placing a folder on the desk between them. "I've reviewed your resume, Ms. Foster. Impressive work history before your gap in employment." "Yes, about that," Elaine began, the familiar explanation ready on her lips. Richard held up a hand. "No need to explain. Life happens. What matters is your qualifications and your willingness to learn. The position I have in mind is for an administrative coordinator in our community outreach division. It involves organizing public events, managing communication with various community groups, and helping to develop programs that serve our underrepresented populations." Elaine blinked, surprised. "That sounds considerably more involved than an administrative assistant position." "It is. The salary is commensurate with the responsibilities. $45,000 annually, with full benefits including health insurance, retirement contribution, and childcare assistance. We also offer flexible scheduling for parents of young children and remote work options when appropriate." The figure made Elaine's breath catch. It was nearly double what she'd been making at her last job before Zoe was born. With that salary, she could afford a better apartment, reliable childcare, even start saving for Zoe's education. "Mr. Calloway," she said carefully, "this sounds like an incredible opportunity. But I have to ask, why me? You must have candidates with more recent experience, without a 5-year employment gap." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment before responding. "Let me be direct, Miss Foster. Yesterday morning, you parked in a metered spot on Maple Street for an interview. The meter expired while you were still inside. One of our parking enforcement officers, rather than issuing you a ticket, chose to pay your meter himself." Elaine's eyes widened. "How did you—" "I saw it happen from this window," Richard continued. "I also saw your reaction when you returned to your car. It made me curious about both of you. The officer who broke protocol to show kindness, and the woman whose relief at finding her meter paid suggested a deeper story." He opened the folder between them, revealing not just her resume, but what appeared to be a vehicle registration and a background check. "A bit of research revealed your situation. Single mother, recent loss of child support, excellent work history before taking time off to raise your daughter. The kind of person who might benefit greatly from a second chance." Elaine sat very still, processing his words. "So this interview, it's because a parking attendant showed me kindness?" "Partially," Richard acknowledged, "but mainly because what I discovered about you matches a need we have. This department exists to serve the community, Ms. Foster. Too often, bureaucracy gets in the way of that mission. We need people who understand firsthand the challenges our citizens face, who bring empathy and personal experience to their work." He closed the folder. "The kindness you were shown yesterday was a catalyst, but your qualifications are why you're sitting here now. The position is real, the need is genuine, and based on what I've learned about you, I believe you'd excel in this role." Elaine's mind raced. It seemed too perfect, too providential. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it, Richard replied. I'd like you to meet the team, see the workspace, understand exactly what the job entails before making a decision. Can you come back tomorrow for a more formal interview and department tour? Around 10 in the morning? Yes, Elaine said, finding her voice again. Yes, I'd like that very much. Excellent. Richard stood, extending his hand again. And Ms. Foster, sometimes life's greatest opportunities arise from its smallest moments. Remember that in your new role here. As Elaine collected Zoe and left the building, her mind was spinning. From desperation to hope in less than 24 hours, all because a parking attendant had chosen kindness over punishment. She wished she could thank him, tell him how his small act had set something miraculous in motion. Little did she know, their paths were about to cross again, in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Marcus's morning had been unusually busy. A downtown event had filled the parking meters early, and he'd spent the first hours of his shift helping visitors navigate the parking payment system rather than issuing tickets. It was a welcome change. Being helpful rather than punitive made the job almost enjoyable. As he finished his coffee break in the small break room on the ground floor of the municipal building, his radio crackled to life. Johnson, report to Director Calloway's office. Third floor, East Wing. Marcus froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips. In 7 years, he'd been called to the director's office exactly once, when he'd first been hired. Parking enforcement officers rarely had direct contact with department heads. They reported to shift supervisors who then reported up the chain of command. Being summoned directly could only mean one thing. Someone had reported him for feeding the meter yesterday. His heart sank. He couldn't afford to lose this job, especially not with his child support obligations and the girls coming next weekend. With a heavy sigh, Marcus disposed of his coffee cup and made his way to the elevator. The ride to the third floor seemed both too short and interminably long. When the doors opened, he stepped into a hallway considerably nicer than the utilitarian spaces the enforcement division occupied on the ground floor. A secretary directed him to a corner office with a nameplate reading, Richard Calloway, Director of Municipal Services. Marcus knocked tentatively. Come in, called a deep voice from within. Marcus entered to find Richard Calloway standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back. The director was an imposing figure, tall with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. To Marcus's surprise, there was another person in the office as well, a woman seated in one of the visitors' chairs. When she turned to look at him, Marcus felt a jolt of recognition. It was her, the owner of the blue Honda. Officer Johnson, Richard said, turning from the window. Thank you for coming up. Please have a seat. Marcus sat stiffly in the chair beside the woman, who was regarding him with an expression of dawning recognition. His mind raced. Was this an ambush? Had she complained about him? I believe you two have met, though not formally. Richard continued, taking his own seat behind the desk. Marcus Johnson, this is Elaine Foster. Ms. Foster, this is the parking enforcement officer I mentioned to you yesterday. Elaine's face softened into a smile. You're the one who paid my meter. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Yes. I'm sorry if that was inappropriate. Inappropriate? Elaine echoed, clearly surprised. It was incredibly kind. I came back from a terrible interview expecting a parking ticket on top of everything else. Finding the meter paid instead, you have no idea what that meant to me. Officer Johnson, Richard interjected, I'm curious. What made you decide to pay Ms. Foster's meter rather than issue a ticket? It was a clear violation of department policy. Marcus swallowed hard. There was no point in denying it now. I saw the note on her dashboard about an interview and the car seat in the back. I've been there, trying to make ends meet, every unexpected expense feeling like the last straw. I just couldn't add to someone's burden that day. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Even knowing you could face disciplinary action? Yes, sir, Marcus replied, bracing himself for what was coming next. Instead of the reprimand he expected, Richard leaned back in his chair with a small smile. Do you know why I became involved in public service, Officer Johnson? Confused by the apparent change in subject, Marcus shook his head. Because I believed in serving the community, in making people's lives better, not harder. Somewhere along the way, many in municipal government lose sight of that purpose. They become enforcers of rules rather than facilitators of community well-being. He gestured toward the window. Every day I watch our city from this office. I see acts of kindness and acts of indifference. Yours was the first act of compassion I'd witnessed from a parking enforcement officer in longer than I care to admit. Marcus glanced at Elaine, who seemed as puzzled as he was by the direction of the conversation. I've been reviewing your personnel file, Officer Johnson, Richard continued, 7 years of service, consistent performance evaluations, minimal complaints compared to your peers. And now I discover you possess something even more valuable, judgment and empathy. Thank you, sir, Marcus said cautiously, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. I've recently created a new position within our community outreach division, Richard explained, Deputy Coordinator for Parking and Transportation Services. The role involves working with local businesses, residents, and visitors to develop more user-friendly parking solutions. Education rather than enforcement. Community building rather than revenue generation. It would mean a significant increase in both responsibility and compensation. Marcus stared at him, uncomprehending. Sir, I'm offering you the position, Officer Johnson. Your act of kindness toward Ms. Foster revealed the kind of character I want in this department's leadership. Ms. Foster, who is joining our team as administrative coordinator, would be working closely with you on community initiatives. The room seemed to tilt slightly as Marcus processed the director's words. A promotion? A significant raise? Working in community outreach rather than enforcement? It seemed impossible. I don't know what to say, he stammered. Say you'll consider it, Richard replied, echoing the words he'd used with Elaine the day before. The position starts in 2 weeks. That should give you time to wrap up your current assignments and prepare for the transition. Yes, of course I'll consider it, Marcus said quickly. Thank you for this opportunity. Don't thank me yet, Richard said with a wry smile. The job will be challenging. You'll be the face of a department that many citizens view with frustration or hostility. Your task will be to change that perception, one interaction at a time. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. I'll have HR send you the formal offer letter this afternoon. Ms. Foster begins her position on Monday. I suggest you two get acquainted. You'll be working closely together. As they left the director's office, Marcus and Elaine stood awkwardly in the hallway, both still processing the unexpected turn of events. So, Marcus said finally, it seems we'll be colleagues. Elaine nodded, a smile spreading across her face. All because you put 4 quarters in a meter, and you had an interview note on your dashboard, he added. I didn't even get that job, she admitted. It was a disaster from start to finish. Seems like it worked out for the best, Marcus observed. More than you know, Elaine said softly. Mr. Calloway mentioned you have children. 2 daughters. They live with their mother, but I have them every other weekend. I have a daughter too. Zoe. She's 3. Elaine hesitated, then continued. Listen, would you like to get coffee sometime? I feel like I owe you more thanks than just a quick conversation in a hallway. Marcus felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. A lightness he hadn't experienced in years. I'd like that. Very much. As they exchanged phone numbers, neither of them noticed Richard Calloway watching from his office doorway, a satisfied smile on his face. Sometimes, he thought, the universe needed just a little help bringing the right people together at the right time. 6 months later, the community center buzzed with activity as residents filed in for the town hall meeting. Colorful posters lined the walls, illustrating the new parking initiatives that had been implemented downtown over the past several months. At the registration table, Elaine Foster greeted attendees with a warm smile, handing out information packets and directing people to the refreshment area. Across the room, Marcus Johnson was engaged in animated conversation with a group of small business owners, pointing to a map of the downtown area where new parking options had been created. His navy blue municipal services jacket, a new one, with proper insulation and the department's redesigned logo, was unbuttoned in the warm room. Richard Calloway stood near the back, observing with satisfaction. The community parking initiative had been his brainchild, but Elaine and Marcus had brought it to life with an enthusiasm and creativity that exceeded his expectations. In 6 short months, parking violation revenue had decreased by 20%, a figure that would have alarmed his predecessors, but community satisfaction ratings had increased by 35%. More importantly, downtown businesses were reporting increased foot traffic and sales as parking became less of a deterrent for visitors. As the formal presentation began, Richard watched his 2 newest employees take the stage together. They moved with the comfortable synchronicity of people who had developed a strong working relationship, finishing each other's sentences, deferring to each other's expertise, supporting each other's points with relevant data. But Richard saw something else too, something beyond professional respect. It was in the way Marcus's eyes followed Elaine when she moved across the stage, in the gentle touches they exchanged when passing materials back and forth, in the shared smiles when audience members asked questions they had anticipated. Something had bloomed between them, nurtured by daily collaboration and a shared commitment to making their community better. Richard wasn't surprised. He'd seen enough of life to recognize when two people were healing each other's wounds, filling in each other's empty spaces. After the presentation, as attendees mingled and discussed the initiatives, Richard approached the pair. "Excellent work, both of you," he said sincerely. "You've taken this project further than I imagined possible in such a short time." "Thank you, sir," Marcus replied, standing a little straighter. The past 6 months had changed him. There was a confidence in his bearing now, a sense of purpose that had been missing before. "We're already seeing positive results in the downtown core. Business owners are reporting increased customer satisfaction, and parking compliance is actually up despite fewer tickets being issued. And the educational components have been particularly well received." Elaine added, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "The parking app usage has increased 60% since we started the training sessions at the senior center." Richard nodded approvingly. "I knew I'd made the right choice with both of you." He glanced between them, a knowing smile playing at his lips. In all respects, a faint blush colored Elaine's cheeks, and Marcus cleared his throat, neither confirming nor denying the implication. A small voice interrupted the moment. "Mommy, Marcus, did you see me handing out the stickers?" Zoe Foster, now 4 years old, bounded up to them, her dark curls bouncing. She wore a miniature version of the municipal services jacket, specially made for her as a birthday gift from the department. Marcus knelt to her level. "You did an amazing job, Deputy Zoe. Those stickers are very important." Zoe beamed, clearly delighted with her role in the event. She turned to Richard with the unself-conscious directness of childhood. "Mr. Richard, are you coming to dinner at our new house tonight? Emma and Lily are making dessert." Richard chuckled. "Not tonight, Zoe. But thank you for the invitation. Perhaps another time." As Zoe skipped off to continue her sticker distribution, Richard turned back to Marcus and Elaine. "New house. We're renting a place together." Elaine explained, her hand finding Marcus's. "It has enough room for all of us, including the girls on their weekends. It just made sense, financially speaking." "Of course," Richard said, his eyes twinkling. "Financially speaking?" Marcus laughed, no longer embarrassed. "Well, that was how it started. But we've discovered there are other benefits to combining our households." "I can imagine," Richard said warmly. "Life has a way of bringing the right people together at the right time. Sometimes with a little help." Elaine added, giving him a meaningful look. Richard shrugged modestly. "I merely recognized potential where others might have seen a problem. The rest was all you." As the event wound down and they began cleaning up, Richard found himself watching the unlikely family they had become. Marcus and Elaine working side by side, Zoe helping. By gathering name tags, Emma and Lily, who had arrived after school, carefully taking down the posters for reuse. From his window on that cold October morning, Richard had witnessed a small act of kindness, 4/4 in a meter. From that tiny seed, something remarkable had grown. 2 lives redirected, a family formed, a community better served. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting the city in white. Inside, warmth and connection flourished. Proof that sometimes the universe does indeed work in mysterious ways, setting wheels in motion through the smallest acts of kindness. And sometimes, Richard thought as he buttoned his coat to leave, those wheels lead exactly where they're supposed to go.